good morning, good afternoon, good evening, whatever time of the day you're listening or watching this. It does not matter. Mr. Jones is just happy that you're tuned in. Welcome to day 3, chapter 3 of Brian's Winter. So as always, before I get started, I want to give out some shout outs. First off, shout out to everybody that's been watching and listening the past 3 days. It's great that you're still continuing learning even though the schools are closed, so keep it up. Next, I want to give a couple of solo shout outs. So first, I want to give a shout out to Josiah Irving from my class. These read alouds come out at 10 in the morning on YouTube every day. So Josiah, he listened to it and sent his answers in to Mr. Jones at 10:30 this morning, which shows that he woke up right away, watched the video, sent his answers in. He also was done with all of his work by 12 o'clock today. So shout out to Josiah for working super hard today. Keep it up. Next, I want to give a shout out to Jonathan. So Josiah he sent his answers in super duper early. And on the other hand, yesterday, Jonathan, he sent his answers in at 11 o'clock at night. And it just goes to show that with this new socially distant learning, it doesn't matter when you get your work done as long as you get it done. So Josiah, he woke up super duper early, turned his work in at 12 o'clock, and he had his day to himself. Jonathan, he woke up, probably played a little Fortnite, probably had some fun, probably went outside, went for a walk, and then he turned his work in late at night. But you know what? Both boys got the work done. So it just goes to show that as long as you're getting your work done, everything is all good. Another shout I want to give is to Yuritsa. So as I was going over some of the answers for everyone's answers to my questions, one of Yuritsa's answers really stuck out to me. It was her answer to question number 3, I think, where the question was, who was Brian's worst enemy and why? And the answer I was really looking for was that Brian's worst enemy from the last chapter was really going to be the cold, because the winter was starting, and we talked about how the winter was going to present a lot of problems for Brian, with it being cold, with animals migrating and hibernating, with Brian having to stay warm and all those things. But Yuritsa, her answer was different. She actually said that Brian was his own worst enemy. And at first, it took me some time to understand what she was trying to say, but when you actually think about it, it's a very good answer, because she's saying Brian is his own worst enemy, because even though the winter is coming, if you're prepared for it, it's not really your enemy. But the problem with the winter, and the problem with the bear, and the problem with all these things that Brian is having is that he wasn't on top of it. So he wasn't prepared for a bear to come. He didn't have the right weapons. He wasn't paying very close attention to the seasons changing. So it wasn't that more so that winter was his problem or the cold was his problem. It was more so that he was his own worst enemy, because he wasn't paying attention, and then those were creating problems for him. So shout out to Yuritsa for making Mr. Jones rethink his answer. Last 2 shout outs go to my 2 voters in the glasses challenge. So I had 2 comments on the video from yesterday. One was from a Quinn Jefferson. I don't know what student that was, or if they're using one of their family members' accounts, but they said they liked option 1 best, so I'm wearing those first. And then the second vote came from Sophia's mom's account, and I'm sure that was Sophia voting, and she said that she liked option 4 best. So halfway through the video, I'll just switch to those glasses, since it was a 1-1 tie. Now, I know some students are probably saying, hey, Mr. Jones, I'm not in your class, so I can't message you on Dojo, or I don't have a YouTube account, so I can't comment and vote. How can I vote for which glasses you should wear? I got you. So if you're not in Mr. Jones' class, or you don't have a YouTube account and you still want to vote for which glasses you think he should wear, just message your teacher on Dojo and tell them to tell me which glasses you picked, and your vote still counts. Simple as that. All right, so before I get to reading chapter 3, I want to do a quick review of chapter 2 so that we know what's going on when we're reading. So in chapter 2, when we read, we saw that the setting was presenting a lot of problems for Brian. And if you remember, setting is time and place, and both of those 2 elements of setting were presenting different problems for Brian. So the winter, or the time, which was winter, was presenting problems for Brian because, 1, it was cold and he didn't have the necessary items to protect him from the cold, but also because since it was the winter and he was in the forest and he needed to hunt food to survive, the things that he was hunting, animals, a lot of those animals hibernate or migrate in the winter, so it was becoming hard for him to hunt and find food. The other part of the setting, which is place, which was presenting problems for Brian, was he was in the forest and he had to fend for himself in the forest. And also what comes with that is he's not the only thing that wants to and needs to hunt and eat in the forest. And he went face to face with 2 different other predators that were competing with him for food. One was the wolves, and he was able to get out of that he was able to get out of that challenge with the wolves because he knew what they did to protect their territory from other wolves, and he did the same thing. However, what he used to protect himself from the wolves or protect his territory from the wolves didn't work against the bear, and we saw that that presented a different challenge for him, and he ended up being hurt. His food was taken, and his shelter was damaged. So then at the end of the chapter, he realized that he's going to have to do something different to survive the winter and survive in the forest against all these elements. So that's where we're left off in this chapter. So we're looking to see, what does Brian do? What does Brian do to fight off the elements or the challenges that he's presented by the setting? All right, so let's get into it. Chapter 3. He decided he needed a stronger weapon, a larger bow. He thought of it as a war bow. He would need arrows tipped with some kind of sharpened head. He had been hunting with wood arrows with fire-hardened tips, but all they did was make a hole. They didn't provide any cutting action, which he felt would work best with a stronger bow. He used a hardwood tree he found by the lake. It had straight branches with the slickest gray bark and seemed to have a snap to it that the other woods didn't hold. He spent one whole day cutting a long, straight piece of wood and skinning and shaping it with the hunting knife and his hatchet into a bow shape slightly longer than he was tall. He did not hurry, but kept at it with a steady pace, and by dark, the bow was ready to dry. Arrow shafts took 2 days in the sun to dry once they were stripped of their bark, and he thought the bow might take 4 or 5. He took time to cut another straight limb and shape another bow, working by firelight into the night. It wouldn't hurt to have 2 bows, and if one broke, he had a backup. He had not hunted for 3 days now, but had eaten well of fool bird and rabbit on his last hunt, and he took time to take 2 fish from the pool and cook them before going to sleep, boiling them into a fish soup. I don't know about no fish soup, which he drank spoon-finger picked until the bones were clean. That night it was cold enough so that the sleeping bag felt almost delicious. Just as he closed his eyes, it came to him. All the signs, all the little nudges. The cold would get worse. Summer was over. He would not get rescued. He had finally given up on it and no longer listened or looked for planes, and he was going to get hit with a northern winter. All of that came to him just as he started to doze, and it snapped him awake and kept him awake until exhaustion finally made him sleep. In the morning, he awakened with the same feeling of urgency and spent the day cutting arrow shafts from the willows for his war bow and trying to reason out what he needed to do to get ready for the coming winter. He had no warm clothing or footgear. The sleeping bag was a good one, though not a true winter bag. It was effective to perhaps 20 above if used in a good shelter, but that was all he had, the sleeping bag, and he couldn't spend all his time just lying in the bag. He would starve and die. He would have to continue hunting, eating, and living. He looked at the shelter with new eyes. He had repaired the damage the bear had done. He studied his home while stripping the bark from the 24 arrow shafts he cut for the war bow. 3 sides were of rock, and 3 were snug. But the side he had filled in with logs and limbs and branches was far from airtight. He could see through it in several places, and it would have to be winterized. He could pack it with dead leaves or even cut strips aside with the hatchet to fill it in, and make an insulated door by stuffing 2 woven frames full of leaves. The problem, well, he thought, smiling, one of about 1,000 problems, was that he didn't honestly know how cold it would get or how much snow there would be or what he could do to live. What would be available to hunt in the winter? He knew some things migrated, but he wasn't sure which things or even if rabbits came out. Maybe they stayed inside brush piles or caves all winter and slept. Also, would he have to have a fire inside the shelter to stay warm? He shook his head and paused in scraping the bark off one of the shafts to look across the lake. Too much to know for right now. Too much to do. In the trees on the other side of the lake, the leaves were changing. They must have been doing it for a week or more, he thought. Why didn't I see it? And now that he noted it, he saw that in many other areas the leaves were changing as well. Mostly gold, some shades of pink and red, scattered bits of color. And the sky over the lake was different as well. The soft summer clouds were gone, and where it was blue, it was a flat coppery blue, and where the clouds were coming, they were a slate gray. And they grew as he watched. Not in thunderheads as in the summer, towering and full of drama, but in almost ugly gray that was all one shade and expanded from the north to cover the sky as if pushed by a large hand. Even as he watched, the patch of blue he had seen at first was gone, and all the sky was gray, and he could smell rain. Again, not the rain of summer, but a cooler, almost cold rain was coming, and it made him shiver, though it had not yet started. He went back to his shaving on the arrow shafts, concentrating on the task at hand. Something else he had learned: do what you can, do what you can as you can. Problems will come no matter what you do, and you must respond as they come. And indeed, he was having enough trouble with the idea of a war bow. It was all well and good to say he would have a more powerful bow, in the hope that a better weapon would give him more protection, but making one and the arrows was harder than he had thought it would be. It all came down to poking a hole in something to kill it, he thought. That's what weapons were all about. Whether it was a gun or a spear or an arrow, something had to die for him to live, and the way to kill it was by poking a hole in it to make it die. He grimaced. But it was so. The hole had to be poked, the animal had to be killed, and therein lay the difficulty with the war bow. It was one thing to poke a hole in a rabbit or a fool bird. They were small and thin-skinned. It was something else to think of doing it to a large animal. Once he had shot at a porcupine up in the tree with his light bow, thinking that if he could bring it down and skin it very carefully, he would get more meat and fat than he did off the rabbits and fool birds. He was amazed to see his arrow bounce harmlessly off the side of the porcupine. If he could not shoot a relatively small animal, what could be done to kill or even hurt a larger one? It was in the strength of the bow, he thought. In the type of arrow, the bow had to be so stiff it would drive the arrow much harder into a large animal. To get deeper into a vital area, and the arrow had to have some way to cut through and make a larger hole. The stiffer bow he thought he had already made, though he would have to wait and string it to make it certain, but the arrows were a problem. He had stiffer shafts to take the extra load of a stronger bow, but the points were something else again. He thought on them long and hard all that night while working on the shafts by the fire. He considered the bits of aluminum scrap from the skin of the plane, but they were too thin and too soft. So I want to stop there for a second, and I want you to brainstorm, and maybe you can help Brian out. So right now he's having issues with making a stronger bow and arrow to protect himself from bigger animals like bears, and to kill bigger animals than rabbits and fool birds like a porcupine. So I want you to either stop and jot, or if you're listening to this with somebody else, you can have a conversation with them and give Brian some suggestions of what he should do to make a stronger arrow. Whether he should make like a sharper arrow or make his bow stronger, or should he pull on it harder? What can you do? So brainstorm and help Brian out. So pause it here, write your answer down, and then we'll get right back to the second half of the book.